yeah, it teaches people to have imagination.
Right.
And, movies, for example, teach a lot of things, but so let me just do a welcome here since we made it online, it seems, and I have to get this chat set up so I can see it. Let a few people come. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Proof of Life. Skip has been through his hip replacement surgery, so now I'm half a bionic man. I have three replaced joints, and I turned 75 just probably since we were on the last time. So here's a 75-year-old man. I have three replaced joints. Why do I have three replaced joints? Well, I've lived an active life, and I put a lot of pressure on those joints over the years in many ways. And thankfully now we have wonderful medicine that makes it possible to be retread and move on. And I feel like I have a new life. And hip replacement is by far the easiest of the three replacements, because in the case of the knee, I was not able to go up into our living area in my house. I had to live in the basement for 4 weeks, and it took a good 8 weeks to recover. And I was on the walker for about 4 weeks with the knee. With the ankle, I had to never put my foot down for 8 weeks, and I had to ride around the house on a knee scooter for 8 weeks. And I didn't go outside. I only went outside 3 times in that 8 weeks, and with great difficulty. But thankfully, my wife helped me, so I was able to get outside. But with the knee replacement, I was walking that day. I was out of the hospital after 4 hours. 4 hours after the surgery, I was home. And I managed to climb myself up into our apartment on the new hip. And I graduated to the cane, my God, about 5 days after the surgery. I was off the walker and onto the cane. And yesterday I walked around the dining room table. So this was 10 days post-surgery. I walked around the dining room table without a cane. And so it's really a retread and a new life. Joint replacement these days is nothing to be feared. And also I was off the opioid, the Oxycontin, a week ago. So 4 days post-op, I was able to stop the opioid painkiller, and I basically am fully recovered. I'm, still a little tired, so I'm thrilled with it. I urge everyone to pay attention to what people say in medicine. we have something wonderful, and be thankful for Medicare, because I couldn't possibly afford the medical treatments I've had this year, including radiation therapy and a couple of our other little procedures, plus hip replacement, without my Marine Corps retired healthcare, which is for life. So it's a wonderful thing once you put in the 23 years in the Marine Corps. But basically, once you're over 65, Medicare takes care of it by and large, and that's just a terrific thing. And
well, then I want to wish you a hippie birthday.
Yeah, it's a terrific thing. So anyway, today I wanted to talk about one idea, and I'm going to refer back to Ezra Pound and his selected letters. And I'm looking at letter number 5 from 1912. And there's a couple things he says here. There's a paragraph that says, but can you teach the American poet that poetry is an art with a technique, with media, an art that must be in constant flux, a constant change of manner, if it is to live? Can you teach him that it is not a pentametric echo of the sociological dogma printed in last year's magazines? Maybe. Anyhow, you have work before you. He's saying this to the publisher of Poetry Magazine when Poetry Magazine was just beginning. And then he makes this statement at the end of the page. He says, the glory of any nation is to produce art that can be exported without disgrace of its origin. And that got me thinking about why we should care about art and why we should have better art teaching in our schools. And I thought we could, Jordan and I could usefully have a conversation about that topic. So there's the question for you, Jordan. Why art? Why should we care about what Pound is saying here?
Primarily, I'll use architecture as an example. You start out with a white page, and you take that blank page, and you end up not going to court after instructing someone to dig a hole, pour concrete, and structurally put something together. Mm-hmm. Now, where did that come from? That blank page to that set of drawings that are implementable, that are in such a way to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Like health, safety, and welfare, just a building code. Thing is, though, that sounds very, very specific if I just gloss over. But that blank page and the first line is this art we're talking about of how we build our lives. And I find that the process of building a life is like a kid in a sandbox building a sandcastle. And it can just go right down if you don't have the right water mixture in the sand or the repose angle that holds a pile at a certain height. And I think in that capacity, just that blank architectural, just actually now let me lose architecture, just that blank page. And how and why do you draw the substance, the what of that first line that squares the circle of the page? So I find that first line, I'll dial into the world that exists in just that moment. The circle may have no beginning and end, but when I put a compass down, it has a beginning. And then at its end, when the lead passes over the first point, then it has no beginning and end. Mm-hmm. But I find that being comfortable with the not knowing while daily getting things done is an important dance, almost like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, so that the creativity is driving things to be alive, eros, and not stale.
Yeah, we have to have an imagination, don't we? Because when you start putting a drawing on a computer screen, these days it's on computer screens. It used to be mechanical drawing, and you'd have to draw it out by hand, but you'd have to be imagining the entire building, and before you could put that first line down. And it's a rather complicated thing. I actually designed a 43-story tower once for India back when I was in my inflated days, right before the crash of 2008. And I actually thought I was going to get it funded. I was not the architect, but I hired architects to do the drawing. But it was my imagination that created that building. And I don't know, maybe I can find a picture of it if I'm lucky.
Well, that brings up a great point, because then you actually, as the architect, and those architects as your draftspeople. And what happens then is then those people are your creative tools also.
Mhm.
So you then implement an idea, and that's another imaginative action, or imagine action, as I typically call it, and in my work. And
well, this is not the best picture of it. Let me just see if I have the best picture of it.
was there a reason for 43 stories? Was it a square footage thing, or a design thing, or?
We wanted to be big. Okay. let me. I mean, I was hugely inflated when I was doing this process, and I'll show you why in a minute here. Okay, so all right, this will be cool to look at, because I think you do not know about this aspect of my career.
It's brand new to me, so
yeah,
that's a good thing.
Here it is. This is the building, and it was to be built in Hyderabad, India, and it's called the Babana Diamond. And the reason for that is there was a diamond that was discovered in the river in Hyderabad called the Kohinoor. And the Kohinoor is the largest diamond ever discovered. And it's in the crown jewels of Great Britain at the moment. And so we wanted to create something that was diamond-like. And so this is the architect's conception of what I was talking about. And then this is sort of the image of what it was. Can you read those words there?
I cannot. They're too small on my screen.
Okay,
Here we go.
How about now?
Yeah, 43 floor mixed use development offering.
Yeah. And so it had a hotel and all kinds of things in it. And boy, did I ever enjoy this, because my personality type in Myers-Briggs is architect. And so I had huge fun doing this.
What's interesting about the form there too, you have this abstracted prismatic crown, and it's very literally regal, like a kingly crown, but in a natural crystalline lattice kind of formation. And that's what an interesting structure.
Yeah. Trying there, I guess there are two sides to this thing. So this is the entire brochure we were putting together. And we actually were out raising money to build this thing. It had all kinds of internal aspects. We actually had a 5-minute walkthrough in animation made. That was fun and awesome.
Yeah, literally the jewel of India. And what's interesting is that I think that prismatic crown, it's this faceted cut jewel. But interestingly enough, in such a rectilinear form, it becomes literally crystal or crystalline, because crystals will form in stem or columnar kind of formation. So you're combining a lot of different subtle elements, not just a cut jewel, but this is even a cut crystal.
So as you see, this is the name of the architect that I was working with, and they had fun too. Let's see if I can show this a little bit better, if I can make it. Can you see this split, the words here?
Oh,
so it's hotel on the top, residential banquet halls, office use, and then a mall on the bottom. And it's internally, it's all atrium, and it's all glass, basically. Let's see if I can change the view here again.
Well, what's interesting to me is going back to what I originally said about the blank piece of paper, and then adding in your statement of basically of what you've done to implement an idea, that even just coming to the point of this brochure, the brochure itself is a complete project. And so in a sense, this is the brochure becomes the ideal pre-visualization of what has been visualized. So the brochure implemented is a stage in the process.
Yeah.
So seeing clearly your vision in the brochure assures the clarity of the vision of the building. And so in a sense, it's a dry run. And I would say that the brochure is a complete piece of architecture in itself.
Yeah.
That's what a great example.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that, I can tell you. And it was amazing to do it. Good morning or afternoon, Justin. Nice to see you. Hi, Kathy. And yes, I'm back. I'm alive and well, and I wouldn't say entirely pain-free, but at least controlled by Tylenol. And
well, I think that line you wrote, the glory of any nation is to produce art that can be exported without disgrace to its origin.
Yeah, I didn't write that line. Ezra Pound wrote that line, but I read it, and you read it.
Well, no, right. Out of letter number 5 to Harriet Monroe from 1912 in London, where he was. But if I read that again, the glory of any nation is to produce art that can be exported without disgrace to its origin. So if I change just 2 words, this becomes individuation. If I say the glory of any individual is to produce art that can be expressed without disgrace to itself or to its origin, the person, the artist, there's a shame has to walk the plank. Anxiety and despair are, hooked to those heels. You better take a big hop once you push the shame off, but then they're gone. And then there's sovereignty. And then there's simply, you're going to draw a line. You're going to build this building, inflated or not. Now that building becomes a whole expression of to implement an idea and the individuation process of even the idea coming into being in life.
Yeah, and it was a close thing. It could have happened easily, except for the fact that Lehman Brothers, investment bank of 187 years history or something like that, went bankrupt. And I had invested my life savings actually in that project, and we had promoted it all over the world. We had promoted it in India, in the United States, in Singapore at a big trade show, and also at a big conference in California in Santa Cruz, believe it or not, Half Moon Bay. And so, it was a happening thing, except that while I was in Santa Cruz at that big conference, was when the crash, when Lehman Brothers bankruptcy was announced, believe it or not. And it was, well, who was the guy that was the promoter of the inaugural of Trump that got anyway, never mind. That's a story.
Banyan?
Huh?
Banyan? No.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's a good story there, but I was literally in the room with all these high rolling, big building builders, people that build the towers of Manhattan and that sort of thing. And we're standing around during a break, and somebody had brought a television set in, and the television set was going across, and the news was being announced about the bankruptcy. And I heard one of these guys say, it was stupid of us to have a financial crash in the middle of a political campaign, a presidential campaign, because it was September the 15th, 2008. So it was like 6 weeks before the 2008 election. And it probably got Barack Obama elected.
Well, and it's interesting too, that was a season after May 5th, 2008, when the first earthquakes of that presented, but then quieted down without aftershock. And then 3 months later in September, bye-bye, the earth moved.
Right. And so that was the day that I didn't quite realize how the depth of my loss was, but I realized that project that I had worked on for probably at least a year, maybe a couple of years, had collapsed because Lehman Brothers was out of the picture. And
what's interesting, on that same day at noon, my phone started ringing, and by noon 42, and I just remember because writing things down in my phone log as they came in, by noon 12:42, 2.5 years of architectural work under contract was gone.
Yeah. And
that morning, DHL had delivered from Canada my self-published tarot deck. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting there for 42 minutes with this deck up in my hand, and the hand kind of became somebody else. And I kept looking over quizzically, but it was hanging out. And then right at the last one, you just knew. I mean, I looked down, I had been doing invoicing, and every single project was crossed off. And before I finished the sentence of I just lost everything, I said, I just lost, and I just closed my hand on the deck, didn't possess it, all the way, just don't lose that.
Yeah.
Don't lose that. So then I pushed the architecture work aside, literally, and started unfolding my completely numbed out to the cannonball that just went through my stomach. But that same day, it took me 10 years, I think, to recollect and respond internally to the depth of that loss.
Yeah. So Jordan, I just want you to tell me, how surprised are you that Skip worked on a project like that? Led a project.
Well, actually, not at all, because there's the mercurial part of Skip that's an expert at many things, which honestly is very military. Someone walks through and there's a mess. It's like, well, don't ask someone to get a broom. Pick up the broom yourself. You get it done. And so, you want to put a building together, then Skip's I'm going to do that. And to me, that's my kind of old school, because even, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright's era, to be licensed in architecture wasn't an insurance phenomenon. It wasn't a liability phenomenon. It was that you stayed in business is the phenomenon. So that's
Right.
the best thing you can do for your clients. So even licensure, for example, in psychology and architecture and engineering and law and medicine has become an insurance phenomenon. And so back then, Skip had an idea and Skip did it. And it's very Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer,
Yeah.
you know, except
It really is.
with dollar signs and commas in them, you know.
I call it the project of my life, right? And we
Nice.
should all think of it as the project of our lives. I remember when I was in Japan in the early 80s, I used to get I was in a business that was selling, believe it or not, pile weather stripping. We were selling 50 million meters a year of it, but anyway, it wasn't very sexy, right? And so, being at a cocktail bag party of bankers and lawyers and expatriate oil company executives, people like that, were most of the expatriates in Japan. And I'd go to this cocktail party and people would say, well, what do you do, Skip? And I said, well, I make pile weather stripping. And it's like saying you make preparation H, right?
Right.
But at some point in one of those cocktail parties, somebody says to me, well, Skip, don't you get tired of headquarters telling you what to do? Don't you get tired of headquarters telling you what to do? Because, I was the guy out in the trenches. And I said, no, I don't get tired of that because they don't tell me what to do. I tell them what to do.
Right.
And so the project of one's life has to be a project of creativity. And, I used to think like my Indian colleagues, some of my Indian colleagues who came from a road education system. And the idea would be you get something done, you get a degree like a law degree or a business degree, and then you're through. My Indian partners used to say that to me. We'll get this next investment in the company and then we're through. And I would say, no, we're not. No, we're not through at all.
I remember a mentor, one of my first mentors, and he would walk into the office and he goes, okay, Jordan, I got good news and I got bad news. Which do you want first? I said, well, let's start with the good news. Butter me up. And he goes, the good news is I just signed up 3 projects. And I said, so what's the bad news? He goes, you got to draw them. See you later. I got to go get some more. But
yeah, it's like that. And so anyway, that this morning, because of that line from Pound, I got to thinking, we're working on this Confluence, which is a conference that we're going to do in Helena, Montana on the 10th to the 14th of June, 2022. And it's really not those dates. One of my partners in putting it together, Colleen Kubert, said, well, the Confluence has already begun. And it surely has. It hugely has. And, just for an example, Tim had a conference over the weekend with a local philanthropist who, every time we tell anybody about what it is we're doing, they want to be a part of it. And these particular people asked Tim, well, what are you going to leave behind after it's over? After you leave on the 15th of June, what are you going to leave behind for Helena? And boy, that was a good question. And so Tim did some noodling about it and it was a man and wife, and he was talking about some of the problems he has because he's a one-man band, and he has no support in the idea of, you know, a secretary or somebody that can get out mailings and that sort of thing. And the woman volunteered to do it, and volunteered to not only do it, but do it for nothing, because they're so convinced that it's a good idea. And so the whole project is, you know, has started to take on legs. It's blowing light. It's coming to life already. It's already alive, and the event in Helena is just going to be a way station on the whole journey of what it is we're doing, which is to show the importance of art and show its relevance to psychology, to religion, and to education. And
you know, Skip, that brings up a great point. I think the difference between volunteerism and employment or business. And for example, when I was volunteer on a 25-person committee to write a comprehensive plan which was unheard of for a 5-year-old municipality in Colorado, and I was chair of community form and identity. Well, so then I'm tasked with writing that chapter 10 of the policy of the whole comp plan, because no one else knew what community form and identity was. And that was just my role. But what's interesting is people working because of passion and because of devotion to that community created a culture of interaction that was creative rather than just profitable. So the bottom line was, will we value this from our grandchildren's perspective? Yeah. Not will our grandchildren have a huge checking account because of this activity? And what it's interesting is the currency then was value instead of the currency being money. And when people are in a volunteer capacity by their own volition, there's a currency of value that you almost can't achieve with money. So
yeah,
when
you
the
cannot
value
achieve it with money.
So the creative currency, I find, is the important distinction between, for example, you took the jewel, the Kohinoor, you know, KOH-I-NOOR. What a great name. I mean, it's even pens in architecture, a brand. And because I used to have jewel tips. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is, I think you're discussing then with that great project, that building you were doing, there was a currency of value that was driving you to achieve the currency to implement the value of that place.
Right.
And that was both.
Let's talk about how this manifests, you know, because I'm quite familiar with it, with the process. And so I just want to, for a moment, talk about the process of this confluence, because I'm not taking anything out of this confluence. I'm not asking to be paid. I'm not asking for a cut of the action. In fact, there probably will be no financial return for the artists who are involved in it, including not being paid for their work for that weekend. But let's just talk about the steps. And it actually started with my cancer diagnosis in February. And the very first thing that came to my mind, the very first thing, was I should have Tim paint my portrait as a legacy for my children on the possibility that I might die from prostate cancer. It looks like I won't, but back then I didn't know. And So that's the very first idea that came into my mind when I had the diagnosis. I mean, I was still on the phone with the doctor when it came into my mind. And so I called Tim and he agreed. And I said, and you know, it can't be from a photograph. He knew this, but I said, I have to come to Helena. And he says, well, maybe you can do it after the radiation therapy. And I said, no, I want to do it now before my cheeks sink, like Edinger did, because Edinger had bladder cancer and died at a little bit older than what I am now. And and so we arranged that I would go out to California, and or I'm sorry, to Montana, and I only had a day to do it, or actually 3 days, 2 days of travel. And so the day that I was physically with Tim in Montana was May the 7th, which by coincidence happened to be my original surgery date for my hip, which I had to put off the hip replacement to do the radiation. And so I spent this amazing day with Tim. And, you know, it was because we have become so close in a couple of years, it was like, it was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the spaceship comes down and it starts to play tones, and it creates this symphony of lights and music and so on at the end of the movie. Well, that's kind of what it was like. It was like two spaceships getting together from different planets and interacting, and it was incredible, right? And you know, it was just a fun day together. But then what? So then I had to leave Helena at 6 o'clock the next morning, and so Tim and I had to get up at like 4, and so get me to the airport, and so I'm on the plane going back to Baltimore, and Tim has done this painting that he showed last week in advanced reading group, where his muse, it's a painting of him painting a picture, and his muse is behind him, and his muse has put a blindfold over his eyes. So the muse is saying, you know, don't look out there, look in here, right? And she's got her knee in his back, and there's a painting in front of him. He's blindfolded, and her knee is in his back, his muse's knee. And he says he's been working on this painting for many years. But the next day, the day I left Helena, which was the 8th of May of this year, I felt like that the whole day. I felt like something was pressuring me in my back. You know, my muse had her knee in my back, and at about 8 o'clock the next morning, my time, so 6 o'clock a.m. in Mountain Time, I started to do a text messaging exchange with Tim, and I said, what if we did a conference in your studio in Helena, because it's this amazing space. It's 7,000 square feet. And I said, you know, you don't even have to vacuum. We'll just, you know, we'll just invite a bunch of people and we'll do it. And we went zip, 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 zip for, I don't know, about an hour on text messaging that morning. And we were launched. And so to go from that to what we have so far is just amazing, because we have 6 artistic people working together to put it together from an organizational point of view. And now we have, an offer of physical and financial help from this Helena couple. And that, that's huge, huge. And
it is huge. And not to interrupt, how tight do you need to be for your hip to the 45 minutes sitting?
I'm okay.
Okay.
We can keep talking for now.
Okay. Keep going.
Yeah. So, I'm not even noticing my hip, honestly, but I mean, from the point of view, I shouldn't sit still for very long because I need to keep my blood flowing, but we can go on for 20, 30.
So you were on the Confluence and philanthropy,
right?
And look at how it is magnetizing.
Right, and so it's pulling, all these things are coming together with it, and some of it I can't even talk about. It's a secret, but it's going to be unbelievable when you see it next year. And we'll be announcing it officially soon, so that there will be an opportunity to express interest in attending, because it's going to be invitation only, and there will only be 30 people invited to attend. We might invite 45, but we're going to limit the attendance to 30. So 45 may get invited, but there won't be more than 30, because that's the number of people we can get into Tim's studio. And
there are only 29 left.
Yes, right. And so but the point is that it's like my project of life. And one time I was asked, in terms of another project I was doing in India, I was asked why, how I was doing this project for this American company. I said, because it's my project. I adopted it, I'm doing it. And, I just have to bring the assets I need into my project. I need finance, I need visualization of what it's going to look like at the end. I need skilled people to perform it, et cetera. I mean, I went through the whole litany of things you need for whatever project, and that's what we do. But that is an art, and people just don't understand that. And it's actually the art of your life, every person's life that's listening to this now. It's the art of putting together your own life that we're talking about here. And so,
Skip, as you were talking, what came to mind to me is that's a military command. You're responsible, and no one else is going to save your rumpus. And and you call it an distraction. Okay, we have an anomaly. There you go. But that's different. And what's interesting is that whole architectural idea is a military command, because you are magnetizing. I need finance. I need visualization. I have all these basically functionally interrelated component parts, the FICP of a project. And that's all hyphenated in one word. You can't, if any one of those, the function, the interrelation, the components, or the parts, if any one of those is missing, the system fails and the mission fails. But you there at the helm as a military command is, people think military, oh, it's so rigid, it's so specific. What happens is it's a lot of discipline of the ritual for a very unknown, serendipitous, you better hope there's some synchronicity, or the foobar occurs, and you go out there for that momentary mission that is fluid, and then you come back and you start doing your exercises again. But that discipline of the ritual, it reminds me of, I think it was I can't remember which French poet, but success is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole military command there that you're
Right.
expressing as a creative process. How many tools, techniques, and disciplines?
Right. And so the point I wanted to get to in this conversation is about art education and about education of every human being in every country. Because if we have the perspective that we're just going to create robots that are going to, produce the goods but not ask questions, and it gives the people the idea, well, you're going to go to this school, you're going to get a job, and then you're through. You could just go sit in front of the TV for the rest of your life and go to work and come home. And boy, that's a rat race that just goes on forever. And we have to change the perspective to you're never done. You need the basic tools for whatever it is you're going to do. And, so the reason I went to business school after law school was I realized very quickly that I detested the practice of law, and there was something missing in my education that I needed. And because I had left active duty in the Marine Corps and was a reservist, I had to find a way to pull something else together. And, that doesn't come from, learning a specific art. I'm not saying that, if you learn painting, you're going to be okay, because it's not like that at all. Or if you learn to be a sculptor, you're going to be through, and that's it. And I'm not trying to make people into that kind of artist, because in our local adult education program, we have an entire building in Annapolis dedicated to the arts. It's called Maryland Hall for the Arts, and it's an amazing thing, because when they desegregated the schools, this building became Maryland Hall for the Arts. So we actually have the original high school. They had to build a new high school so that they could have all the white kids and the black kids go to the same school. And so the old high school, which is an old traditional Victorian high school, has a beautiful auditorium, and every classroom is dedicated to a different art. We have a symphony orchestra, we have a ballet company, and that ballet company is led by 3 women who were prima ballerinas in China and came to the United States, and now they're making a life here. We have a chorus, we have an opera company, and it's just incredible what it does. And they teach, older people mostly how to paint and that sort of thing. But the problem with that, the form of teaching that they use, is that they've got all these little old ladies in an art class with like the leading impressionist of Maryland, and he's actually taking the class, right? You don't even know who he is until you get well into it. But they think that their job, these little old ladies think that their job is to produce a painting that's a replica of the still life that's on the table, and we don't need more pedantic paintings like that. We have cameras for that today. And so if you want a picture of something, you don't have to learn how to paint a still life. All you have to do is pick up your cell phone and you can take a picture, right? And so then what is art about? And this is what artists have been terrible at articulating. And that is uh, the activation of the psyche. This is the insight that I had just before we started this discussion, was that all of this, whether it's country western music or any of the arts, plus going to movies, that sort of thing, what does that do? What does it do? It activates the psyche and gives people it gives people the possibility of innovation, but it also standardizes people. So we have any number of movies, and there are millions of movies today, where we have this hero thing where there's always a girl, and there's people coming from outer space to attack us, and the hero saves the world and gets the girl, and that's the story, and everybody thinks that that's the hero's journey, and that's what they should be doing. And it's not them, that they're never going to, the people in the audience are never going to be that hero, and they know it, and so they just go to be entertained by that rather than to understand that it's they should have their psyche activated by what's happening. And go ahead. I talked a long time, George.
I was going to say, no, but that, I love when you say that, the ladies there who are there to imitate the masters, to paint. There's the pedantic part of the art there. There's also the military discipline of the ritual of imitation as a martial arts kata, or a martial arts form for how to paint this painting, in a sense, stepping in the shoes of the master or mistress, painter, artist, to then understand basically dance steps for you to then learn your own dance, make your own dance. And I always find that the 5 words I like to use is I'm always complete, never finished, lifelong. So, you don't, back to that first quote in letter 5, you basically don't shame the origin of the creation. You don't shame yourself. You don't shame the culture or the art. And by imitation, people, that's the 101 course of art, but that's not itself art. There's an art to it, but it's an art to learning dance. And I find that then that's that military discipline of the ritual. But then the painting, Tim's long form moment of years on the painting of the Muse with the knee and the blindfold. That is a fluid moment that lives until always complete, never finished, lifelong. He moves to the next painting that's coming into being.
Right. So there's a few interesting comments here from folks, and I just want to point out, just in case's point, he says, I think this talk about values expose our poor culture and has become how poor our culture has become. And he says, just a few weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that the AIs, I guess it's AIs, cannot hold copyrights and or own patents, even though they can create and invent. They are still regarded as tools only. But wait and see. Unlike women's suffragette, it won't take 3 generations for the AIs to get the right to own, wrote and whatever, vote and whatever. It won't take. He corrected it. The AIs to get the right to own, vote, and whatever.
Well, and I will piggyback right on that from a JD perspective, from a legal perspective. All the AIs need to do is discover the precedent of the case of corporations being treated as people, because an entity treated as a person, that's then now not groundbreaking anymore. That would be a precedent in an argument and in a case for the AIs to do that.
They're going to take over.
I know.
Yeah.
They
You just put that idea out there in the universe.
they
they're
just
gonna
slipped a
pull
bag
it
of
in.
cash through my door, so my
Yeah.
loyalty. No,
That's
but
funny.
that's a good point,
Right.
Justin, because you're dealing then with the concept of logos eros. What is an entity? Okay, is it an entity or is it a being?
Yeah.
So I mean, the whole consciousness and cognition piece, much less love and life in there. That's a good
Right.
that's a good point with the AI case.
Right. So the whole point, it seems to me, in American education, probably worldwide education, is that the purpose of art is to activate certain parts of the psyche. And obviously, if you go to a museum or a rock concert or what have you, it's going to activate certain parts of you so that later on in your life, those things come to mind when there's a situation that's appropriate. And so, I have it happen all the time from movies where I've probably seen at least 3,000 movies in my lifetime. And as Jordan clearly knows, I very often talk about a movie, and it's because I've seen so many movies. I literally, when a point from a movie comes up that's relevant to my life, I can actually recite the dialogue from that movie, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting, even speaking to the movie point, in college, there was, especially sticking with the AI too, a philosophy course called The Image and Reality of Man and the Machine in Modern Literature.
Right.
And what it was is we needed to write a 30-page paper on some movie that supported our tenet or our point. And mine was, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. But I chose the movie Altered States.
Mm-hmm.
And what is interesting is you change what's inside and it externalizes to change what's outside. And so, for example, with Justin cases, say AI, are they entities or beings? Someone would, several years ago could have said, oh, well, as long as they're plugged into the electrical system, they're just an entity. They're just a thing. Well, now with wireless charging, that becomes more like a heart. They don't have to actually be connected to something. They can have their own power source in a sense. So
Mm-hmm.
things evolve to imitate. And I think that imitation of the masters kind of thing, all these things trying to imitate life.
Right. And so, we have to have, the richness of culture, the richness of having art is that you can do more, you can learn more about your own life than just balancing the checkbook. Because nowadays, all people get through high school, and then we have a lot of high school dropouts, is they learn how to have a checkbook, and they learn how to write basic profane text messages, but maybe they learn how to be an unruly child as an adult, but they don't learn how to have a wonderful, powerful life and an experiential life. And that's we have to change somehow, and that means changing the perspective. And the perspective of art in schools has been, we're just teaching people to paint like to replicate the still life, and that isn't what art is about at all. And
your concept of the activation of the psyche, and then your exact words of writing profane texts, I would agree the language is atrocious, and that's not even snobbish. It's people not learning how to even spell something. Everything gets truncated. They don't get the opportunity to learn to spell it correctly,
right,
because they're taught baby MBA. they can almost speak in acronyms, and that's, you talk to any MBA who's stuck there, and you're going to just get a lot of, wow, what do all those letters together mean? But what comes up with the word profane, let me amplify it. And to amplify it, there's a wonderful narrative biography called The Sacred and the Profane. And it's about Mozart and Salieri. And Salieri would be the profane, the one who can almost to the point of genius play something. He's basically a capital I imitator. And then you get Mozart, who hops in the sandbox, and here comes the symphony. And Mozart's the sacred, and Salieri is the profane. And then introduces, he introduced the jealousy, and then the fracture, and then the split, which then goes kind of to Jung and Freud, where then Freud, I would have to say, would be in that sense the profane, and Jung was the limitless, which is the sacred. Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of great quotes along these lines that I'm now pulling together and thinking about. One comes from Picasso, who said one time, when I was 11, I could paint like Goya. And it was only after that I could learn to paint like Picasso. And even his journal on the front, the journal said, Je suis le cahier de Picasso. I am the journal of Picasso. So he made the journal a thing that was alive, that was not him. It was outside of him. And even Picasso said, inspiration will find you working. So, you're not going to get the runner's high at 22 miles sitting on the couch. Right. Right. And so then the other one that I came to my mind was Van Cliburn, who obviously was a remarkable pianist from the time he was 17 or 18. He was winning international contests in Russia. And it's like learning the piano. You can study and practice learning the piano until you're blue in the face and not be able to play like Cliburn. And Cliburn said that it's not the notes that count, it's how they're played and the spaces between the notes. And so people tend to think that they can learn some specific thing and get it, and then they've got it, and so on. And it's to play like Cliburn, you have to be gifted, and he learned the notes long ago. But a quote that goes with that it's interesting about the implementation, the activation of the psyche. I mean, it's probably from any action movie, I'm not sure which one. But when someone's threatening someone else, and then the other person has said nothing and just said nothing, and then just leans in and go, you talk a good game, but can you box? And then they go silent again. And it's like, basically, okay, what you going to do with that? And so what's going to go on the canvas? What's the process? And so a lot of talk is all the dance steps, all the learning, these strokes and the notes and the keys, but it's those connective tissue spaces between that live out those notes into life. Right. And so, there's a couple of political issues that are being discussed on the YouTube channel here. And I say the powers that be really have us flashbanged because, many of us just hang on the news 7x24, and we just want to know what's going on all the time. And so as a result of that, we're watching somebody else live their lives. We're not living our life. And go ahead. Well, I'll say even Mark Twain over 100 years ago. If you don't read the paper every morning, you're uninformed. And if you do read the paper, you're misinformed. So, you got to decide for yourself. Right. So,
So that's an interesting insight, I think, that I had, that art is about activating something in the psyche. And, my issue, being a very logos oriented guy, and not very eros, I used to go to art museums, and man, it was okay, a lot of nice pictures here, so what? And, that's sort of the way I took it. Although I did get more and more interested in art, and especially when I was in my 50s, I started to take up painting for myself. And then I went to the Boston Museum of Art once and saw a display of modern art, and it was just mind-boggling. And I'll talk about two things that were there that I haven't talked about much before. One was a piece by, I think his name is Theron. And what it is it's a simple dining room table and chairs, but it's 3 times normal size. And so it actually took up an entire room in the museum. And when you walk into it, the seats of the chairs are up above your head, and there's the underside of the table, which you can walk right under, and wow, instantly you feel like you're 3 years old. Okay, you have exactly that feeling, and it just tells you, wow, oh, that's impressive.
That piece, that particular installation, inspired someone a way to get around the building code. There was a rancher, and he wanted to build a horse shelter for the horses, but the building department denied his permit application for this horse shelter. So he was a little disgruntled, and he and his wife went on a vacation to that installation. And he came back and he built this 18-foot high table and 12-foot tall chairs that had, a little triangle like a picnic blanket coming over it, and the horses were all standing under it. And said they denied my horse shelter, but the building code doesn't say I can't build a table and chairs. So there's, you can find it on the internet. I'll have to find a picture, but literally you'll see the horses under this table and chairs that are about the size, if not actually, they may have actually bought that installation, but it inspired that to get around the building code. They came out, the building inspector told him to tear it down. He goes, I didn't build a horse shelter. He goes, I built a table and chairs. And they go, but your horses are under their sheltering. I said, well, you can't tell me what I can't do with my dining room table, even if I put it in the yard. And even if I make it really, really big, that I need a ladder to climb into the chair. My wife and I will go sit on those if you'd like. They are chairs. They're just large. So there's your creative.
Yeah,
I'll have to find
hadn't heard that one before, but that's what we're talking about is seeing
right.
something like that and having that influence something that you have to do in life. And so he had that. He
just blew right past the building code.
Yep. So that's a great one. Great one. Okay, so
and I think that particular installation inspired him. He just imitated. But the thing is, that then made it's priceless.
Right. So there's another piece that was in that show, and this is a show I attended in 1995 or so. But I still the whole show is still really memorable in my mind. And so the second piece was Jasper Johns, and Jasper Johns became famous for painting American flags. And I used to say, well, ho hum, okay, you can paint an American flag. What's the big deal, right? And when you see a Johns painting that's on a postcard or something, it looks like a painting of an American flag. But when you see his work in real life, the particular piece that I'm thinking of in that show, in real life, it's just mind-boggling, because within that American flag, he's put all sorts of things in very either little tiny images or tiny words that have huge meaning. And you would only know that if you looked at the piece itself physically, because if you buy a postcard of it from the museum shop, you can't even see this stuff, let alone be impressed by it. But when I saw it in real life and was impressed by it, wow, and I remember another time I was at the Walters, and my mother-in-law really likes the work of Claude Monet. And, Monet did these lily ponds. He built a lily pond and then he painted it multiple times. And she wanted to go to the show of Monet at the Walters in Baltimore. And we went to it, and I go, oh my God, when you see it in real life, first of all, these paintings, some of these paintings are immense. They're, 5 or 10 feet high and 15 feet wide, but also the structure of the paint, there's paint an inch and a half thick on some of those paintings. So, when you look at it in a poster or an art print that you might buy at the museum shop, you have no clue what it's like. But when you see it in real life, it's just incredible. And so the third thing I wanted to mention was the Pollock. And, Jackson Pollock was famous for doing these strip paintings. And like most people, I think, who have never seen a real Pollock, you say, what's this about? What's this art about here? And because, okay, I can take paint and drip it on a canvas, and what does that mean? Any kindergartner can do that. You want to comment on that first, Jordan, before I give my punchline?
Yeah, definitely. Because what's interesting is that's then the superficial expected response to, I have actually not experienced something. I read it in a book, and
right, or I bought it at the museum shop.
Right, and then not to go anywhere near spoiling the punchline. I'll go back to Jasper Johns, where you get topography, like landform of painting, and the way the painting comes into the room and then recedes into the canvas. There literally is a 3-dimensional experiential aspect that, like you said, a print, a poster cannot convey that. And though there's no longer the smell of the paint, which that would be a whole nother level of at the origin, just like, do not shame the origin, just like the Ezra Pound line. That painting has to be lived viscerally to be fully experienced.
Right. So in that show was Jackson Pollock's number 31, which is a drip painting. And, it's not particularly interesting from a color standpoint. And of course, he prided himself in not having any image whatsoever in these paintings. He didn't want to, create something where you could pick out eyes, and they're, okay, they're the eyes of the tiger hidden in the painting or something like that. And so he intentionally tried to not put anything in it. And I walked into this gallery where this thing was, and oh my God, I started to weep. And I sort of, whoa, what's that about? And I couldn't get control of myself for 10 minutes. And it took me 20 years to work it out, what it was that happened to me. And my friend Bill Woodard, at one of my local meetups, I told the story and he said olive drab. And just those two words were enough to connect it up. And I started to weep again. And I realized that I had not properly mourned the death of my roommate from the basic school in Vietnam. He was killed in Vietnam on April the 11th, 1969. His name was Robert M. Christian Jr. And Bob was like my big brother. And we left the basic school, and 5 months later, he was dead. And I got to live my life and have my children and do all the things that I've done. And you know, back in the Vietnam War, I was pretty numb, and a lot of Lugosi guys are pretty numb about lots of things. And I was certainly pretty numb, but because you can't hear about all these deaths of people and not have it affect you. But you know, then I grokked it, what that painting is about. And you know, it's made a huge difference because it was a luminous moment for me, which I can describe to people and so on. Go ahead, Jordan.
No, I was just nodding the olive drab, where then that's the trigger, but that's the connective tissue that was missing all the years between what you were seeing and experiencing and what you were feeling in the activation of your psyche. I mean, it sounds like there was zero nanoseconds between your eyes gazed into the painting and you were touched, and that was an activation of your psyche. And then it's interesting, 20 years later, it comes around to two words that bring that back, and then you have a deep knowing of that, and then you're conscious of your psyche's activation, which then becomes a useful tool.
Right. And something that I can bring back and explain to people now. And so that relates to this insight I had right before we started this morning about how the reason we need art, it isn't because we need to teach people how to replicate a camera or to replicate Picasso or any other such thing. It's because we have to teach people to activate their psyche and culture, the arts, whether from country western music right on to everything else, dance, whatever it is, all those arts do cause us to activate our psyches, which is what we're trying to do in education in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And even then further from that, to get to beauty. And what's interesting is the beauty of life, the beauty of architecture, the actual necessity of beauty. There's a book called Beauty, Neuroscience, and Architecture by Donald H. Ruggles, who actually is that mentor that used to say, there's good news and there's bad news.
Yeah.
Good news is I got a project. Bad news, you got to draw it. But he's written this really wonderful, beautifully put together book called Beauty, Neuroscience, and Architecture. And it makes the case that beauty is not something that should be a luxury. It's actually necessary for well-being. And so this art of activating, people say, why should we fund the arts? That they don't make any money. Well, the value there, the currency there is money. But we're talking here about the activation of the psyche being the currency of value. And in that activation of the psyche, you increase someone's life force. Then they increase their life force themselves. that's more profitable because there's more juice in the system. There's more octane in the business even. So the beauty is actually a necessity.
And there's two approaches to education. One is to learn things by rote, and one is to learn how to learn, which is from the liberal arts. And the issue is people who learn their art as an art form, whether they know it or not, are going to live much richer, fuller lives than people who just learn things by rote. I mean, any human being that we pick at, if we pick the most primitive human being and stuck them in front of a television for 10 years, we would train that person by rote to know everything about current events, let's say. And what we would be training them in is there's either the liberal side or the conservative side. And because that's hammered into us day in and day out, right? If you watch the cable news, you find that they're all talking about the same story very often. And
the Native American, left wing, right wing, don't you notice that they belong to the same bird?
Right, exactly. And so I want to think about this idea more, but it's one that I want to introduce into the Confluence next summer. And we're working very actively on this project now. And
well, check your email. I sent you an image about the activation of the psyche, but to implement the idea, like you were doing with your building, that you were tickled enough when I mentioned the story that if you even see the picture, the activation of the psyche, implementing the idea of someone telling someone this, and he said no, and it's there in your email.
Oh, okay. This is the horses. They're terrific. Let me just get it up.
And to me, that's the building department says, the logo says, but the arrow says, which one's going to win,
Yeah, this is really worth seeing. Okay, it's coming up. Thank you, Jordan, for sure.
Yeah, and it seems to just push the activation of the psyche. Art is about this. So this farmer was denied a building permit to build a horse shelter. Unfortunately, you don't need a permit to build a table and chairs. Yeah, that to me, that I think that's our poster child for your idea today. I mean, because it's there's the whole process of even getting around the legal part.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And the plywood that's hanging over the triangle piece, painted like that's just a piece of plywood that's been painted to look like a picnic tablecloth.
Right. Terrific.
And the flowers, and I mean
that's a classic. I'm going to hang on to that one because it's what people seeing over time. That's terrific.
Yeah, I have to say, being an expert witness for a while, sometimes levity was the only way to really get through somewhere. And why make a precedent or why use precedents when you can just make one?
Yeah, and
that one.
It's one thing to have you tell us about it, and it reaches an entirely new level when you actually see it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Why use precedents when you can set them instead? There's the art.
Yeah. So I think it's time to wrap it up today because I need to get my blood running again. But I just wanted to be sure we showed that we're here again, and proof of life, Skip's alive and got through his surgery. And I'm not totally retread yet, but I'm also not going to do the other surgery, I don't think, because when I was diagnosed with the prostate cancer, I had to go through this full workup to determine whether radiation would help me. And in the course of that, they said, well, he's got a moderate hiatal hernia, which I had before. I had a really bad one before. And a hiatal hernia is a tear in your diaphragm that allows your stomach to come up into your lung cavity. And it's difficult to breathe, and it's difficult to eat, and so on if you have a hiatal hernia. And I think mine probably got started when I was in the Marines and we were fighting with pugil sticks. And one time I was hit very hard in the chest, like a boxer getting hit in the chest with a pugil stick, and it just gradually became worse over many, many years. And so when the radiologist looked at it years ago, 10 years ago, he said, wow, Mr. Conover, this is the worst hiatal hernia I've ever seen. And so I did have it surgically repaired at that time. And so when the report on the x-ray came back and said I have a moderate hiatal hernia, I was alarmed, as you might guess, and thought, well, I better get that repaired too this year. And so I did do all the workups for it. Unfortunately, the doctors in that field said, well, you're not presenting clinically on the hiatal hernia right now. And so I would not get the surgery, have the surgery. So I did all the workups for the surgery, and I fully expected later this year to do another hiatal hernia surgery, but now I don't think I need it. So, or I need it perhaps, but I had it repaired once, so that means the second one would be more complicated. And so I'm just going to put a pin in that one and say, well, if I start to have serious symptoms, I'll go get it fixed. But if not, I'm going to keep moving here.
Well, and that gives you your own personal diagnostic of, if it does not present clinically, which means you can experience it, you can see it, the effects, then in one sense, it's not that it doesn't exist, but it wouldn't, if I bring this back to the business and you're building to implement an idea to activate the psyche, then it's not a priority. Yeah. And in that sense, form doesn't follow function, form follows priority. And the form of your actions. Right.
And I do know, what it's like to, if I were having real problems with it, which I'm not. Right. So let's just look quickly. Miles is here. Hello, Miles. Thank you for being
Miles.
Here. And Justin, it says to Kathy, yes, what else can we do than trying to be good examples ourselves? Surely that's true.
Well, that's a great example of, you talk a good game, but can you box? I mean, It's like you get out on the dance floor and you show, you do. And then that leading by example that Justin's mentioning, that's an excellent way to express this, that to basically not show your work, no one cares about the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
So what's the art?
Yeah, and Justin made a further comment here. Last weekend, I was moderating a panel on political sci-fi with 2 Danish and an American author. It was scary how difficult it was to make them say anything interesting, except for examples such as, I do sometimes have colored protagonists in my novels. They seem to have no much sense of what political means, but they were very politically correct.
But there you go. I mean, they're talking
says,
fish scales.
Yeah, Kathy says, sounds sterilized. And Justin says, totally. What I mean is, why volunteer for such a panel if not defending anyone, or at least have a political statement? And
well, with Kathy's, that sounds sterilized. A great example of that would be Jacques Tati, the French filmmaker. Jacques Tati's farcical parody on modern architecture being medical hygiene, a movie called Mon Oncle, M-O-N, and then O-N-C-L-E, which is my uncle in French. And it is just the most hilarious. I mean, there's a fish out of water sculpture, literally. The house has eyes that are the people inside. When you drop the coffee decanter, it bounces back up into your hand. You know, as we know, if you breathe on a coffee decanter wrong, it cracks. So, you know, it's Mon Oncle would speak right to her. That sounds sterilized. It's a hilarious example of that.
Well, and our whole education system is designed to sterilize us, it seems to me.
Right.
And watching television 7x24 or watching the news is designed to sterilize us too, because we keep getting hammered day after day after day by some tabloid story like the Petito story, where yes, beautiful young woman is killed in the Rockies, and they haven't captured the guy that possibly did it yet. And so they just repeat that day after day after day, and they haven't talked about the news at all. A lot of it has gone tabloid.
And they haven't talked about the people of color who've had thousands of disappearances. All of a sudden there's this one, you know, I hate to put it this way, but there's this one white chick. Yeah. And that's as intellectual as I can be there. And there's no reason to be anymore, because there's the value of life that's then ignored, which creates implicit bias racism rather than actual racism. People are racist and they don't know it.
Precisely. And they think they're watching the news, but they're not. I mean, when's the last time you heard any news about something going on in Japan?
And the news is Chinese water torture technique, because what it is, Chinese water torture technique, you just drip the drop at the exact same time. You do not vary the timing. You take the life even out of the timing. Drop of water on the forehead, drop of water on the forehead. Thing is, a water dropping on a rock, drip, drip, over thousands of years will create a hole in the rock. Right. So the Chinese water torture is the hole in the rock concept of, don't worry, the water will find a way. It will get through. This person will break. I mean, you know, so in the news is that same barrage, except you're getting Gatling gun Chinese water torture.
And meanwhile, when we're doing that, when we're watching it, we're not thinking for ourselves. We're letting them think for us. And Miles says this great comment here: political correct / sterilize / maintain the status quo / keep people in the feed line.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, we wouldn't have to wear masks if we just went ahead and put that bucket back over our mouth with the elastic over the top of our head and just, you know, chow on our oats.
Right. And, you know, there is diversity in thought in the United States, and it gets ugly sometimes. People wonder, you know, why we're always having arguments here in the United States and so on. But in the fullness of time, we see things like, the Nobel Prizes, for example, which are granted by a Swedish authority or a Norwegian authority, depending on if it's the Peace Prize or not. Right. And, very often more than half of those prizes go to an American. And if you went through the whole list of Nobel Peace Prize winners since inception, I would think that very likely you'd get certainly more than half of the winners are Americans. And the reason is that we do encourage differences of thought in this country. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do in this session today. And the result of that is that we have created a thoughtful population. And sometimes it gets garrulous, and I agree that it's often argumentative. But that's how we create steel. I mean, the metaphor is you heat iron enough, and then you pound the impurities out of it, and once you do that, you have steel. And
then take it another level up, making a sword. You pound out the impurities in such a way, and you fold it over itself in such a way that the final piece, this super hot sword, red hot sword, goes into the coldest, cleanest water. And if there's any micro fracture, any imperfection anywhere, you hear the and and you feel it in your hand when a sword cracks. And if you pull it out, it looks just fine, but you just bang it over something and there it goes in half. Yeah. And so there's the tempering and the quickening even of just their structural steel, and then there's katana steel,
Right. So that's the heat of the American political system, which has created a strong and stable country, even though we've had this close call with authoritarianism, which maybe is not over yet, but I think it's essentially over.
I think it's in a wane. But I think also what's happening is people are starting to find things like the work of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, SACHS, that's dignity and difference, dignity of difference, where it's not about imitation. It's about what is your intent? What do you feel? What value is your life contributing? And that whole, leave a place better than you found it is that lineage piece of all of our lives.
And we leave an impression that Americans are always at one another's throats, but that's not true at all. I mean, aside from the times that we're talking about it on YouTube or on cable news, 99.99999% of the time you go outside, you go to the store, nobody ever thinks about this stuff. Nobody cares who's there in line with them at the grocery store or any other such thing. I mean, we might care a little bit in this COVID time where we might care if somebody's got COVID. But aside from that, nobody cares what your political beliefs are. And
in that regard, I really wish I knew this person's name to thank them more than I did there in the grocery store. But standing in the line, the two people in front of me did not know each other. They were talking, and as the woman in front, there's a guy in front of me, and then this woman in front of him. As she was turning to leave, she said, to him, she said, thank you for not bringing up politics and all that hullabaloo so we could meet as people instead of puppets.
Right.
And I was like, such a wise statement, such a wise statement.
Kathy makes a great comment here. It's willful disregard of soul. And the problem that we have is that as soon as we mention a word like soul, everybody thinks religion, and then we think about all the disputes about religion that we have and that sort of thing. But we have a different church on every street corner here in the United States, but we have to teach people about soul. What is it? Because it's the very basis upon which you live your life, and that means thinking for yourself. Let's close with this, which is your project is your life, and you have to learn how you're going to live your life, not somebody else's. If you're staring at the television, or you're staring at other people giving talks or whatever it is, then you're living their life, not your life.
Exactly. And I think also with Kathy's comment of willful disregard of soul, and then you mentioning we need to teach people about soul. And I really resonate with the way Jerome Waddle expressed the difference between spirit and soul. And he said, spirit is that which emanates from the soul. The soul is the originator of the spirit. And that, to me, it makes a wonderful clarity of voice statement. You talk a good game, but can you box? What's going to come out of you? What spirit is going to emerge from your soul?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Annapolis.
Yeah.
How are you all today?
As you can hear in the background, Deb is starting a session that she's
it got
running.
cold here too.
we have to get out of here.
Wrap it up.
Yeah. So
great to see you today, and continued
nice to
swift
see you.
recovery to you.
Yeah. Take care. Thank you.
You too.
See you next week.